Hey, church family. I wanted to take this opportunity to present you with another word of encouragement as we continue to pray for the recovery of our country. Now, the city of Los Angeles recently issued a cease and desist letter to Grace Community Church and its pastor. And the reason why? Well, is due to the fact that they refused to bow a knee to the executive orders of Governor Gavin Newsom. It was actually July the 13th when Governor Newsom ordered every church in 30 California counties to stop all indoor services indefinitely. Indefinitely. Now, this made sense back in March, right? When we were told that 2 million people were going to die from the coronavirus. And the lockdown made sense when we believed that the virus was a death sentence, regardless of your age or regardless of your health. But now it's 6 months later and we know more. We now know that the peak of the projected curve, never going to happen. Never going to happen. Therefore, the initial goal of flattening the curve, it's no longer necessary because the curve never happened. We've seen small curves, but nothing in comparison to what we were initially told. We also know that portions of the population are at risk, and we know which portions of the population that is. We know that healthy people under the age of 30 have a 99.9% chance of recovering from this virus. And those who are between the ages of 30 and 60 have a 99.7% chance of recovery. The median age of coronavirus deaths is 80 years old. And my heart breaks for every person who has died from this. But listen, the fact is that 43% of all coronavirus deaths that have occurred here in the U.S. Occurred in nursing homes. What this means is that we know who we ought to be locking down. We know who ought to be living in quarantine for their own protection. Not only that, but listen, doctors now know how to better treat those who are infected. Back at the beginning of the lockdown, treatment was still in question, but now we know how to better treat them. As a result, the recovery rate continues to improve, and we can praise the Lord for this. But in light of all of this information, listen, those who insist on further lockdowns, those who are insisting that the entire population has to continue in lockdown, this is based on something other than science. It's not based in science to say we have to continue locking down. Now, in order to further make my case, I would simply ask the governor and the mayor who's currently enforcing their mask laws, do masks work? If you're a governor or you're a mayor and you're enforcing a mask law, does it work? Does the mask work? Do you really believe that a mask will keep an infected person from spreading the virus? Do you really believe that masks will stop the virus from entering our lungs? If so, well, praise the Lord. If the mask works, then there's no reason to continue lockdowns. If masks actually work, then there's no real reason for Governor Newsom to rob California Christians of their constitutional right to congregate. Sadly, the far left leaders like Governor Newsom, they see no contradiction between the enforcement of a mask law and the unconstitutional order to shutter the doors of every church. If masks work, then why is Governor Newsom still enforcing his draconian order, against every church? Why is he threatening to fine churches that won't comply? Why is he preparing to shut off the utilities of the church that doesn't obey him? Now I realize that the far left leaders could care less about our constitutional rights. And I realize that they have no problem abusing the power of executive orders in order to get around the First Amendment. Therefore, we would do well to encourage them to remember an idea that they actually believe in. You see, every far left leader loves to remind us about the separation of church and state. Anytime the church comes along and wants to have influence over the state, separation of church and state. They love the separation of church and state so long as the church is being kept out of state affairs. What they fail to realize is that the wall of separation between the church and the state is something that ought to work both ways. Listen, those who are quick to insist upon the separation of church and state ought to stand in opposition to every law that a leader would make against the church. If the state wants to make laws against the church ought to say, oh, separation of church and state. You can't have a law against the church because you have demanded a separation of church and state. With that being the case, I encourage every person on both sides of the political aisle, let's make sure that we elect leaders who will support the constitutional rights of every Christian to congregate. Let's make sure that we elect leaders who aren't using executive orders to pass unconstitutional laws against the church. Let's elect leaders who support our constitutional rights. And with that, I encourage every Christian, let's continue fighting the good fight of faith, all for the glory of God.